Story time about how I got a facelift when I was 18 to become a famous Instagram model. And I am a famous Instagram model. Can you guess who I am? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I grew up in the Kylie Jenner era when she started getting her lips done. Remember that? Kardashians were a Bible to me. I watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians and was totally obsessed with their looks. You see, at the time, I wasn't the prettiest girl. I was really skinny. I had no bum and no boobalas. Once Kylie Jenner started getting her body done, that's when I really started getting FOMO. To be honest, and I know this sounds cliche, but social media made me start hating my face. I would constantly compare myself to Instagram models. That's when I started photoshopping my pictures. It made me feel so much better to post. Then I begged my parents for lip fillers. They finally said yes and I went ahead and got them. For me, the next logical thing was to look like Kylie Jenner. So I decided my parents to let me get surgery. They finally said yes, but trust me, it took a long time to convince them. We went to a plastic surgeon and that's when I decided to get a full facelift. I know it sounds severe, but it was so worth it. But I didn't stop just at my face. I even convinced my parents to get my boobalas and my bum done. Part 2 is after getting all my plastic surgery at 18, I finally became a famous Instagram model. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. The healing process, of course, was painful, but it was so worth it to me. Once I saw my body and my face, I felt so much better about myself. But something else was missing. Everyone on Instagram was getting their brows tattooed and lash extensions. I went ahead and got those things done too. And I started paying back my parents for all the surgeries. So this was my basic beauty routine. I would get a mani-pedi every 2 weeks. I would get my hair colored every single month. I was getting lip fillers every 6 months. Facials every 2 weeks. Personal trainer who I exercise with 5 times a week. And I forgot to mention, I had 100,000 followers on Instagram at this point. So I was getting a lot of brand deals aside from the modeling. That's when I started noticing that Kylie Jenner's butt was looking bigger, so I wanted to get mine bigger. I also wanted to get my hips wider like her too. I even started buying all the designer stuff that Kylie was wearing too. Part 3 is up. I asked my plastic surgeon to make my butt look bigger like Kylie's. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. By the way, at this point, I'd already had a full facelift and lots of body work done by the time I was 18. My plastic surgeon told me he wouldn't give me another round of butt filler. I was really upset. Then my parents asked me to come over. When I got to their house, they told me the plastic surgeon had called their house and told them that I was looking for more surgery. My parents were beginning to worry, but I assured them that everything was okay. I was not addicted to plastic surgery or anything like that. I just knew how competitive the modeling industry was. Instead, I decided to get filler in my face. I got my nose and my cheeks done. And that's when I started getting hired by more makeup companies. After a year, my Instagram following went from 100,000 to 1 million. I've modeled for over 50 brands and I'm currently planning my own brand. My Instagram followers are constantly accusing me of getting plastic surgery, but I've never admitted to anything. I'll come back to the comments and see if anybody guessed who I am. I know people hate Instagram models because they never admit to it, but I will never admit to my plastic surgery. I mean, I'll probably have plastic surgery again. Have you guessed who I am? Story time about how I just found out I'm pregnant and I don't know if it's my boyfriend's or my sugar daddy's. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, it's not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for a while and everything's been okay, but we're both pretty broke. He doesn't earn a lot of money and I'm usually the one paying for a lot of stuff, but he always tries to chip in on everything. I started modeling a few years ago, but things stopped because of COVID. By the way, I live in LA and a lot of my friends are sugar babies. All of them are Instagram models and influencers, and they know so many rich guys. So I reached out to one of my friends who's a very famous influencer, and I asked her if she could set me up with a sugar daddy. I know I have a boyfriend, but I've been struggling and I just can't pay the bills anymore. She got me a date with this older gentleman who was actually pretty nice. We went out on a few dates and he basically told me what he wanted from me. I agreed to everything. A few months passed by and he asked me to marry him. Of course I had to say no. See, I still love my boyfriend. And I just found out I'm pregnant. Part 2 is I took a pregnancy test and it came out positive. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. And that's when it hit me. I didn't know if it was my boyfriend's or my sugar daddy's. I had been seeing my sugar daddy for about 3 months at that point. So I went to the doctor to find out how far along I was. And sure enough, I was 2 months pregnant. By the way, my boyfriend had no idea I had a sugar daddy, but he also wasn't asking where all the money was coming from to pay our bills. Remember my influencer friend who got me my sugar daddy? She told me to just tell my sugar daddy that the baby was his. That way I could ensure the baby's financial future. I felt really bad saying that since I didn't know if it was his baby. So here's what I did. I told my boyfriend and then I told my sugar daddy. My boyfriend freaked out and told me to unalive the baby, if you know what I mean. And my sugar daddy asked me to marry him again. After that, my sugar daddy bought me a car and he opened up a joint account between the two of us so I have access to a lot of money. My boyfriend's just mad all the time now. My sugar daddy's being so sweet. Part 3 is up. So now that my sugar daddy gave me a lot of money, disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I kind of want to break up with my boyfriend and be with my sugar daddy. My boyfriend is always angry because of the pregnancy. My sugar daddy is totally supportive. Because I wanted to break up with my boyfriend, I started looking through his phone just to see if I could find anything. You know, like an excuse to break up with him. And guess what I found in his DMs? He had been messaging a ton of girls for like 6 months. I went through every single conversation and there were about 15. Some of them are even the influencer girls who I said were my friends. I guess they're not really my friends. A week ago, I found everything and my boyfriend said that he was unhappy in the relationship and that's why he had done it. But now he's saying he wants the baby and that's why we should stay together. But my sugar daddy is being so sweet and he's so excited for the baby. What do you guys think I should do? I definitely think I should break up with my boyfriend, but what if the baby isn't my sugar daddy's? What do I do? Story time about how I came out as bi to my parents. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. By the time I was 12 years old, I definitely knew I was bi. By the time I was 14, I'd already had a girlfriend and a boyfriend, but my parents did not know any of this. When I was 15, I even had a girlfriend for a full year. She would come around the house and I would say that she was my friend. But one day my mom walks in on me and my friend making out on the bed without our shirts on. My mom was so horrified that she actually ran out of the room. Later, I explained to her that we were just playing a game and that it was popular at school. I basically convinced her that I was not bi. Or at least I thought I did. Later on that day, my dad comes to my room and basically asked me if I liked girls. I swore up and down that I didn't. Then when I was 16, I found myself having 2 girlfriends, don't ask me how. Again, they would each come over and I would just say they were my friends. I thought I was home alone, so I invited my girlfriend over. We start fooling around and that's when my door opens. My dad is looking at me getting it on with another girl. Part 2 is up. My dad walks in on me while I was fooling around with a girl in bed. Mind you, I'm a girl. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Keep in mind, I had half of my clothes on. My dad literally picked me up from the bed and threw me out of my room. Then he kicked my girlfriend out. It was definitely traumatizing. My dad called my mom and told her to rush home. They interrogated me for 3 hours. I told them I'd had girlfriends and boyfriends. They were more than shocked. They finally calmed down and I was able to go to sleep. 2 days later, my dad tells me to pack my suitcase. I asked him why, but he wouldn't tell me. Then he drove me to a camp that promises to help your children who are bi. Instead of being afraid, I told my dad that I would try my best. I lasted about 2 days there. They basically made us do Bible study, and I was made to feel like a perv. So I packed my little suitcase and I left. So of course, I packed my suitcase, climbed 2 walls, and I was free. That's when I heard a really scary alarm. Part 3 is up. I thought I was free, but then I hear an alarm sound. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I started running and I got to a main road. Luckily, a bus was pulling up right on time. I get on the bus and I go straight to my girlfriend's house, which was about 2 hours away. That means they would have already told my parents I had escaped. Well, when I get to my girlfriend's house, my parents are already there. But guess what? My parents weren't there to pick me up. They were there to drop off all of my things. Yep, that's right. They kicked me out of the house. Thankfully, my girlfriend's family were super cool and they let me live with them. When I turned 18, I got an apartment and a roommate. My entire family stopped talking to me. It's been 4 years since I last saw my parents. I recently got hired at my dream job, so I went to my parents' house and I told them. I also came out to them properly. At least this time I was not yelled at. I speak to my mom on the phone every now and then, but I feel like I should talk to my dad again. What do you guys think? I just want them to accept me. Story time about how my boyfriend caught me cheating on him with his best friend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend is a total asshole. He's super controlling and jealous. If we ever go to parties, he never lets me out of his sight. And if I ever get hit on, he always blames it on me and tells me that I'm an attention seeker. He even tells me that I'm lucky he hasn't broken up with me because I have cellulite. He's always showing me pictures of other girls on Instagram and tells me that I need to work out so that I can look like them. We've been together for almost exactly a year, but recently I decided that I wanted to break up with him. The only part is I don't know how to do it because he has such a short temper. Well, his best friend, let's call him John. John is super nice and kind. He's super easygoing and makes fun of my boyfriend whenever he gets jealous. I recently opened up to John and asked him how I should do it. He basically told me to just get it over with. Well, 2 weeks ago, we all went to a birthday party. I got extremely drunk. As always, my boyfriend was being an asshole. I don't know what came over me, but I grabbed John's hand and I took him to the bathroom. I locked us in there and we started making out. And my boyfriend literally breaks down the door. My boyfriend breaks down the door and finds me and his best friend in the bathroom shirtless. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend grabs John by the collar and throws him on the floor. Then they start punching each other. I put my shirt back on and several other people started trying to break up the fight. When they finally separated, I told my boyfriend that I didn't want to be with him and that I was breaking up with him. And he grabbed my arm really hard, pulled me out of the party, and put me in his car. He started punching his steering wheel and I told him to calm down. That's when he tells me that I can't break up with him and that I'll never find anyone better. He drove me to my house and on the way he was interrogating me. I told him he was too jealous, controlling, and that he made me feel terrible about myself. Then he told me that that's how he shows his love. Then I told him it was over again. He said the only reason I was breaking up with him was because I was drunk. When he finally left my house, I called John to apologize for everything. That's when John told me my boyfriend had been cheating on me for months and that he actually got a girl pregnant. And worst of all, I knew the girl. Part 3 is up. I knew the girl that my boyfriend had gotten pregnant. I also knew where she lived, so I got in my car and I went over there. She opened the door and I could clearly see a baby bump. I could not believe it. She invited me in and explained that her and my boyfriend had been seeing each other for a few months and that he wanted her to have an abortion, but she didn't want to. She also told me that he threatened her. She also told me that meeting him was the worst thing that ever happened to her. That's when I started getting phone calls from my boyfriend. He started sending me messages asking me where I am, but I had turned off my location so he couldn't see. I finally answered the phone, and when I told him where I was, he hung up on me. When I got home, he was there waiting for me. He denied everything. He said that John made all of that up and that the girl was helping him, and that they were only setting out to break us up. He's basically forcing me to stay with him. So now we're all waiting for the baby to be born to get a paternity test. Also, John and I have been hooking up on the regular. I know that's not good. What do you guys think I should do? Story time about how my blind date hid in my closet for 8 hours. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I'm in my late 20s and I've been looking for a boyfriend for years now. I started using dating apps, but none of that worked. Recently, my boyfriend started dating this really cool guy. He told me he had a really good friend and that he thought they should set me up. Of course, I had never met this guy before. I didn't know if he had social media. I didn't know anything about him. My sister and her boyfriend set up the whole thing. Oh yeah, and my sister told me that he was a doctor, he owned a boat, and loved golfing. So I got ready for the date and I showed up to the restaurant. Right away, he comes over and says hi to me. He knew that I would be wearing a pink shirt. We sat down to eat and we basically stayed at the restaurant for 3 hours just talking and having fun. We talked about a bunch of stuff, and towards the end of the date, he gave me a kiss and asked me out again. I said yes. We said goodbye and I went home. Then I decided to go get ice cream and I went back home. I watched some TV, went to sleep. The next morning, I'm getting ready. I open my closet door and he jumps out. Part 2 is up. This guy had been hiding in my closet for 8 hours watching me sleep and change. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Ran into my living room and I asked him what he was doing. He said that he really liked me and that he just wanted to spend some time with me and he didn't know how to tell me, so he decided to come over to my place when I went to the supermarket the night before. I asked him how he got in and he said he came in through a window. I looked at my window and it was wide open. Remember I said I went to the supermarket in part 1? That's when he decided to come into my apartment. By the way, at this point I had just finished showering and I was in my towel. My knees started shaking and I was so scared. I asked him why he hid in my closet for 8 hours. He said it wasn't a big deal and that he thought I wouldn't see him. Then he actually said that he was excited for our second date. He started walking toward me and I told him to stay away. But then he started getting really angry. So I decided to play it off and act like everything was cool just so that I could get out of my apartment safely. I stayed with him in my apartment for 2 hours. Then I pretended I wanted to go get breakfast together. But then he lunged at me and tried to kiss me. Part 3 is he lunges at me and tries to kiss me. I pushed him away, but then he tried again. I ran to the door, unlocked it, and ran to my neighbor's house. I could feel him right behind me the whole time. He was asking me to calm down while I was running away. Did he actually think I was gonna be flattered that he was hiding in my closet for 8 hours while I slept? Luckily, my neighbor opened the door right away. He let me in, but my blind date tried to pretend that we were together and that we had just gotten into a fight. My neighbor knew better because he knew my situation. He locked the door and then we called the cops. It turns out he went to the same gym I did. My sister's boyfriend goes to the same gym. So he asked my sister's boyfriend to set us up, even though they actually didn't know each other. The cops looked for him but couldn't find him. I haven't seen him since. Story time about how I tricked my ex into paying for all of my plastic surgery. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. A little backstory. I met my ex at the gym. He was actually my personal trainer. He was in really good shape while I was definitely out of shape and pudgy. He motivated me to work out and lose weight. I quickly realized I had a major crush on him. So after a full year of training, I had lost about 30 pounds. I felt really good about myself. So I mustered up the courage to tell him that I had a crush on him. But unfortunately, he told me that he never dated clients. Then he said that we still had a lot of work to do on my body anyway. It was a punch to the gut. I decided I needed to get a new trainer because of what he said and because obviously I had a crush on him. Well, it just so happens that I landed in my dream job. I started making a lot of money. He followed me on Instagram and he started noticing it. I moved into a better apartment and I got a new car. I also got lip filler and cheek filler. That's when he calls me up and asked me on a date. I said yes right away. You'll never guess what happened next. Part 2 is up. Once he saw I had money, he asked me out on a date. I had been crushing on him for more than a year, so I said yes. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. We set up a date and it went really well. He paid for dinner and congratulated me on all my success. After that, we started hanging out almost every single weekend, and about a month later he asked me to be his girlfriend and I was so happy. I had my dream job, I lost weight, I looked damn good, and I got the perfect boyfriend too. But this is when he got toxic. He would start to criticize little things about my body. For example, I had a little bit of fat on my stomach and he would point that out. Or he would point out that my boobs weren't that big. And like I said in part 1, he was a trainer, so he had abs. Made me feel self-conscious, so I never got undressed in front of him. Then one day he suggested I go to a plastic surgeon. He even looked up a few in my area. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend actually suggested I go to a plastic surgeon because he didn't like that my boobs were small and that I had a bit of a tummy. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I got extremely offended, of course. Then he acted like what he said was completely normal. I told him that I love my body as it was. Then he said that I still needed to do a lot of work on it. Then he insinuated that his girlfriend needs to look just as good as he does. In other words, he thought he was better looking than me. So I thought to myself, okay, sure, let's go to this plastic surgeon. But I was gonna find a way to make him pay for it. You see, at this point I was paying for a lot. I would pay for our dates and dinners. He would even sometimes ask me for gas money. We went to the plastic surgeon and I decided to get my boobies done. So I told my boyfriend that all my money was tied up in investments. Then I needed him to loan me the money. He said, yeah, sure, and he transferred the money. I got the plastic surgery and it looks amazing. I've since moved to another city, stalked him on my phone and on social media, and he hasn't been able to find me. I mean, I think he kind of deserved it, but I also feel guilty. What should I do? Story time about how I came out as gay to my husband. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm 27 years old, and when I was in high school, I knew that I like girls. In fact, I pretty much only dated girls throughout all of my high school. I did also date guys. My parents were totally accepting of this, by the way. Growing up, I always knew that I wanted to marry a man so that I could have kids. When I got into college, I started dating this girl. Her and I dated for a couple of weeks, and she introduced me to my now husband. So he and I started hooking up behind her back, and she eventually found out, and she broke up with me. Fast forward a few years later, and we're married. But here's the problem. I found myself only being attracted to women, and I was definitely not attracted to my husband. Obviously, this became a huge problem in the relationship. So guess what my husband did? He hired an escort to come spend some time with us, if you know what I mean. This was great, but I basically only wanted to be with the escort, not my husband. A few weeks later, the escort and I actually started dating. It's so bad, I know. My husband had no idea. And this escort actually asked me to be her girlfriend. Part 2 is up. So the escort and I started dating behind my husband's back. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Like, her and I were in a full-blown relationship. Mind you, I'm a woman. Mind you, my husband doesn't know that I like women only. This went on for a few months. I was living a total lie. My husband would go to work. Since I work from home, I would go to my escort girlfriend's apartment and spend the day with her. I even took a toothbrush and some clothes. One day, my girlfriend and I decided to go watch a movie. We're standing in line to buy popcorn, and of course, we're kissing and holding hands. This is when one of my husband's employees comes up to me, taps my shoulder, and says hi. But she acted like she didn't see anything. Like she was just coming up to me and saying hi. I could tell that something was off. I mean, she saw me kissing this girl. That's when the guilt started getting to me. I could no longer lie to my husband. I knew I had to come out to him. That same night, I talked to my husband. I confessed everything and told him that I really liked women only. That's when he tells me that he knew about the relationship this whole time. That he knew I only liked women. Part 3 is up. My husband tells me that he knew I was having an affair this whole time. That he also knew that I only liked women. Claiming this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. That's when my husband tells me that it's okay. Because he can deal with me having this affair. Because he didn't want anyone to know that he was married to someone that liked women. He told me he'd rather stay married, have kids with me, and basically live a lie. I also forgot to mention my husband's a really wealthy guy. He offered me a lot of money to stay with him and have kids. Last week, I got a letter from his lawyer. It was a contract basically saying that if I stay with him and have his kids, he'll pay me a very large amount of money. But here's the thing. I've fallen in love with my escort girlfriend. She thinks I'm going to divorce my husband to be with her. My husband thinks that I'm going to sign this contract and have his kids. Even my mother-in-law is getting involved. She's begging me to sign the contract and have the kids. Never thought I'd have to choose between love and money. A few days ago, my escort girlfriend actually asked me to move in with her. I told my husband, he said no. What should I do? Story time about how I escaped my abusive husband. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My soon-to-be ex-husband is the most toxic person I've ever met in my entire life. We've been married for almost 3 years. We got married after 4 months of being boyfriend and girlfriend. And to be honest, no, we really didn't know each other. At the beginning, he was totally kind, generous, and really, really fun. We were always going to parties and we had so many friends. Here's where things started getting scary. He never posted me on his Instagram. In fact, he rarely ever posted on his Instagram at all. I'm very active on social media. I'm constantly posting pictures of us together. The fact that he never posted me on his social media made me think that maybe he was trying to look for other girls. But then I found out the truth. One day I get a DM from this girl, and she told me how my boyfriend had abused her in the past. She even had to get a restraining order. She basically told me she wanted to warn me about him. I didn't respond to her message because I wanted to ask him first. I showed him the messages later on that day, and he went nuts. He punched the wall, and he slapped me straight across the face. Part 2 is up. He slapped me straight across the face and I fell to the ground. This is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. When he saw what he'd done, he started apologizing right away. Then he said that the girl who contacted me on Instagram to warn me about him was just his stalker, and that he had broken up with this girl but she couldn't get over him. At the time, we weren't living together, so I went back to my mom's place. I didn't speak to him for a few days. Then he started coming over to my mom's house every single day with flowers, apologizing and begging me back. Unfortunately, I decided to forgive him. 2 weeks later, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I posted a picture of my engagement ring on Instagram, and that's when I got another message from another girl. She told me that my boyfriend was abusive and that she also had to get a restraining order. I didn't know who to believe. I went to my mother-in-law's house and I asked her what had happened. And she basically told me that he has issues with his temper. I asked her if what the girl said was true, and she said it wasn't her business to say. A few weeks later, we got married, and that's when the real torture started. He became super controlling and mean. And when I wouldn't do something he wanted, would lock me in my room for hours. Part 3. My husband would lock me in the bedroom for hours. Then it got worse. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. It got to the point that whenever he would get mad, he would either push me, shake me, or slap me. This went on for a year, but I always hoped that he would just change. After 2 years, I decided to get in contact with the women who said they got restraining orders against my husband. Met up with both of them at a cafe to lie to my husband and say that I was going to be late at work. They brought all their receipts. They had pictures and text messages, emails, and police reports. Couldn't believe it. I mean, I could, but at the same time I couldn't, you know? If I had just paid attention to these girls before we got married, none of this would have happened. But these girls knew exactly what I was going through. So we hatched a plan of how I would escape my abusive husband. At this point, he controlled everything, my cell phone and my bank account. By the way, I hadn't told my mom anything at this point. When I asked her for money and I told her why, she was shocked. The plan would be that I was going to escape at night. I waited for Friday because I knew he'd go out with his friends to drink. I called an Uber, but a few minutes later, my husband shows up at our door. Part 4 is up. The night I was planning to escape my abusive husband, I called an Uber to the house, but my husband showed up 2 minutes later. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. As soon as he walks in through the door, he was totally drunk. That's when he told me that he was hungry. I pretended that everything was normal and that I didn't have an Uber coming to save me. I went to the kitchen, I made him a sandwich as quickly as I could. I came back out, took one bite, and started falling asleep. Thank God. I hid in my backpack behind a curtain, slowly grabbed the backpack and my shoes, and that's when my cell phone notified me that the Uber was there. I was terrorized at this point because I was hoping the noise from the cell phone didn't wake him up. I turned around, but he was totally passed out. I ran barefoot to the Uber, got in, and told him to drive away. Went straight to a friend's house and turned off my phone. Next day, I went straight to a lawyer to file for divorce. I had text messages and pictures. I also went to the police and they said that I can't file a restraining order yet. My husband, of course, is already looking for me. He went to my mom's house, but she didn't let him in. But here's the problem. I already miss him. He sent me an email apologizing, swearing that it won't happen again. My gut's telling me not to go back. What do you guys think? Story time about how I found out my husband was receiving naked pictures from a famous influencer. My husband started getting noticed on YouTube a few years ago. Ever since then, he thinks he's a stupid influencer. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. And let me just say, my husband is so stupid. He is literally like the dumbest person I've ever met. We dated for 2 months before he asked me to marry him. And unfortunately, I said yes. A few months after we got married, his YouTube channel started taking off. And he started acting like he was a stupid celebrity. He hired a publicist. He got himself invited to stupid influencer events. He even tried to get a Hollywood agent. God, he's so stupid. Around this time, he started meeting a lot of influencers, both guys and girls. He was also growing on Instagram. He was always on Instagram. He's so dumb that he wrote all of his passwords in a piece of paper, and it was in my nightstand. So of course, I logged into his Instagram. As soon as I open his DMs, I see naked pictures from a very famous influencer. He was sending her pictures too. Part 2 is up. I open his DMs and I see a famous influencer send him naked pictures. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I started scrolling through the whole conversation with this famous influencer. She had sent him like 15 or more naked pictures. And like I said in part 2, he was sending her pictures too. But his were the ones that disappear after you open them. So maybe he's not so stupid. I took screenshots and saved them on my phone. Then I scrolled through the rest of his DMs. And holy moly, there were other influencers who were sending him pictures. Not all of them were naked pictures. Mind you, all of these influencers knew he was married. I was extremely furious, but I knew I had to keep my head cool. By the way, have you guessed who he is? So here's what I did. I took a stupid little play button from YouTube, and I threw it in a dumpster. Then I turned on the fireplace and put all of his clothes. And I took his passport and ripped all the pages out. You won't believe what happens next. Part 3 is up. After I burned all of my YouTuber husband's clothes, I took all the naked pictures that the influencer sent him, and I sent them to her management. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I wrote to her management and explained what happened. I told them that if they didn't stop working with her, I would send the pictures to TMZ. And just like I expected, within minutes, I got a reply. They begged me to delete the pictures, and they offered me $20,000 to keep my mouth shut. Of course, I said no. And that's when my husband comes home. He sees all of his clothes that I burnt. God, the look on his face was so stupid. I showed him all of my receipts. Then he confessed that he only did the dirty with her once. I literally thought they had just sent pictures to each other. And his phone rings. Guess who it is? It's the damn influencer. She goes off on him and tells him that I'm threatening her career and that how could he be so stupid to not delete the pictures. They haven't spoken since. I still don't know what to do. Did I send the pictures to TMZ? I already filed for divorce too. I want all his money.
Time about how my neighbor killed my dog. So a little background information. When I was about 3 years old, my parents got me a German Shepherd. And my neighbors who lived next to us absolutely loved our dog. And so did their kids. Like their dad literally put a doggy door in the fence so that way our dog could go back and forth from our house to his house. Well, when I was about 8 years old, my neighbors decided to sell their house. So he told us that he had to take out the doggy door because the people that were buying his house hated animals. Well, the people who had just bought his house, they ended up moving in before he could take out the doggy door. So our new neighbors asked us if we could put like a piece of plywood in front of the door so that way our dog couldn't get through. And they said that they would do the same to their side of the fence. So my dad said, yeah, he put a piece of plywood in front of there. Well, my dog, Gabe, the one night that my brother let him out, he ended up getting the plywood off of the doggy door. Well, my brother literally had to crawl through the doggy door to get the dog before one of them saw him in the yard. Like for Part 2 about how my neighbors killed my dog. So like I said, my brother let the dog out and my dog got the piece of plywood off of the door. And my brother had to crawl through the doggy door to get my dog out of our neighbor's yard so that way our neighbors wouldn't wake up and know that he got through. But whenever my brother went to go get Gabe, he realized that my neighbors didn't even have a piece of plywood on their side of the fence or anything. So my brother told my dad and my dad went over there the next day to talk to them. And he pretty much said, I'm not going to have a piece of fucking plywood on my side of the fence if you're not going to be doing anything on yours to prevent my dog from going into your yard. And they were like, oh, well, your old neighbors never took out the doggy door. And my dad was like, that's not our fucking fault. Well, then our new neighbors said, if your dog all of a sudden becomes sick or just does not come back, don't be surprised. My dad decided to replace the door himself. Well, once Gabe realized that the doggy door was gone, when we would let him outside, he would literally just sit there and bark at the fence. Well, 2 weeks later, Gabe ended up passing away. And we found out it's because our neighbors were giving him rat poison. Time about how my best friend got with my boyfriend. Whenever I was in 6th grade, my mom had put me in this summer camp, and that's where I met my best friend Jenna. Well, any boys that I liked at summer camp, Jenna would try and go after them. So fast forward, Jenna and I never went to the same school, which was so nice because I could literally tell her about any guy that I liked and she would not know who the hell it was. Okay guys, real quick before we continue with this story time, today's story time is sponsored by my favorite investing app called Public. With the app Public, I always know which stocks are trending and what my friends and other awesome people are investing in. So make sure to go click the link in my bio to start investing with as little as $1. Okay guys, back to the story. Well, I decided to invite her to my school's football game, the one that my boyfriend was going to be playing at. So I'm getting ready at my house and we're about to go pick her up. And she tells me that she's going to wear one of her dad's Hawaiian button-up shirts and some jean shorts. So I decided to wear the same thing because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable because she never met anybody at my school before. Like for part 2. Story time about how my best friend got with my boyfriend part 2. Real quick, sorry this part is really late. TikTok would not let me post this video at all. So I pick her up and she's wearing a completely different outfit than what she told me she was wearing. And the whole time we were at the game, she was bothering me about who my boyfriend was. And because I knew she was a hoe, I definitely did not tell her who it was. Well, the one week I couldn't make it to one of my boyfriend's football games. And Jenna just decided to show up to my school's football games even though she didn't even fucking go there. Well, the one night she met my boyfriend. She texted me about it that night saying, oh, he's super cute, da-da-da-da-da. I asked my boyfriend what he thought of her, and he said that she was weird and she was hitting on all of his friends. So I thought I didn't have to worry about them getting together, right? wrong. He had invited me to this party and said that I could bring her, so I decided why not give her the benefit of the doubt. Jenna and I had planned on leaving that night because my mom couldn't pick us up in the morning. Well, Jenna ended up spending the night, and I went back there in the morning, and there were hickeys all over my boyfriend's neck.
I've ever seen in my whole life. The skyline is jealous. I'm looking at you, how you shine. The most beautiful time.
Story time about how I crashed my dad's really expensive car. So a little background information. My mom had just got remarried to my stepdad 3 years ago, and he was this rich asshole who owned a bunch of food trucks and thought he was the shit. Well, at the time I also had a boyfriend. And we had only been dating for like a month and a half. But my boyfriend would always beg me to let him drive my stepdad's car. And I always said no because that was like his child. Like he had children. He could care less about them. His car was more important. Anyway, so the one weekend my parents are out of town and one of my friends was throwing a graduation party. So that whole day my boyfriend was trying to talk me into taking the car, and I already knew where my stepdad hid the keys. So I just decided I wouldn't drink that night and I would just take the car. He kept asking me if he could drive, but clearly I said no, because this kid literally told me that he crashed the first 2 cars that he had. So we get to the party, we're having a good time, and one of my friends tells me that everybody's taking pictures with my car outside. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I crashed my dad's very expensive car. So like I said, everybody's taking pictures of the car, but I decided to let it go at first. I mean, there was one point where I went outside just so that way I could kind of let everybody know, hey, you're taking pictures with my car. Well, half an hour later, my boyfriend and I decided to leave, and he's obliterated. Like, we probably got 50 feet from her house, and then I had to stop the car so that way he could get out and throw up in somebody's yard. Anyway, so he gets in the car, we're on the way back to my house, and my house was like a 20-minute drive away. Well, we were 5 minutes from my house. At this one intersection, I get a green light and I go to make a right, and I accidentally hit a car turning out of the bar parking lot. So I'm literally freaking the fuck out. And my boyfriend's in the seat next to me crying for some reason. So the guy in the other car calls the cops. The cops show up, they call my stepdad and my mom. My boyfriend went to the hospital, he had alcohol poisoning. Well, my boyfriend told his mom that it was all my fault and I'm grounded for 6 months. Story time about why I beat up my best friend. So a little background information. Her and I had been best friends since we were in 7th grade. Her family was rich, mine was poor, and at first she was a really good friend. She was always there for me whenever I needed her, until our freshman year of high school, which is when her and I started hanging out with boys. Now, my mom was kind of strict. She wouldn't really let me hang out with boys, but her mom was more lenient about her hanging out with boys. Every weekend she would throw a party at her house, and she would throw them in her attic because 1, it was huge, and 2, her parents didn't give a fuck what she did up there. Anyways, she would always offer to do my hair and makeup before the party started, which always made me really excited because I never really put any work into my physical appearance. Well, little did I know, the only reason why she would offer to do my hair and makeup at these parties was so that way she could make me look like shit in front of all the boys. So after that, I taught myself how to do my own makeup and do my own hair. Part 2 about why I beat up my best friend. So like I said, I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and she went on vacation for like a month straight. Well, when she came home, she threw another party, and she was like, don't worry, after I'm done getting ready, I'll do your makeup and do your hair. And I was like, no, it's fine, I got it. She literally looks at me and she goes, are you sure? You don't really know how to do that. Like, it'll probably look really bad. And I'm like, why the fuck would you say that? She goes, no, like, I don't mean it to be rude. It's just that, like, I want you to look good in front of the boys and stuff like that. Like, sis tried to talk me into getting a shower for a full, like, 20 minutes. So after that, the whole night, she's literally being a pick-me girl. She's making all these comments about me in front of the boys, and I just keep brushing them off until her next party. We got ready and I put on these expensive shoes that I had just bought, and she goes, wow, you just like really like to copy my style, don't you? So she starts making comments that whole night about how my family's poor and stuff like that, and she threw up all over my shoes. So I dumped the trash